In an earlier video, we showed how you can build a software installer for Windows using ClickInstall 3. And in this video, we're going to specifically focus on the subject of code signing that installer and the applications that you install onto the user's computer. So to summarize the process of building the installer, we created some folders. We have a source folder with the application and other associated files like a PDF user guide, DLLs, and so on. And then what we did is we used the ClickInstall application to bring up a window that we can fill in a record of information to build our installer. We click the build button, and the result of that is our finished installer that can be uploaded to our website. When a user downloads and runs the installer, they'll end up with a shortcut on their desktop that launches the installed software. So let's talk about the concept of code signing and what it is and some of the options that you'll want to be aware of, because things have changed pretty radically in 2023. If we go to the Excel Software website, you can get a little information about ClickInstall, but most importantly, here at the bottom, we have links to a couple of pages. You can learn about software delivery and what code signing could help with, and a little bit about virus scanners. On this link, for example, you'll see a window that you've probably noticed before when downloading some software from the internet. And basically, on any modern Windows computer, if that software is not code signed, the first thing the user is going to see is this warning indicating that Windows protected the PC because it was not code signed software. The user can get around that by clicking more info and continuing, but a lot of developers want to avoid that in the first place, and they do that by code signing their application and installer. So what code signing is there's a consortium of companies that manage the code signing process on Windows, and they allow you to purchase a code signing certificate where you provide information about yourself or your company to this organization. They authenticate you as a developer or company, and at the end of the process, you'll get a certificate that will allow you to code sign your applications and installers. Now, there are two kinds of certificates, and here's an example of a company that sells code signing certificates. And you can see there's two main types of certificates. There's OV certificates and EV certificates. Back before 2023, the majority of users, and still will continue to do so, they were using, the majority of developers, I should say, are using OV certificates. But back before 2023, the process was you pay for your certificate, go through this little process where they would ask you a bunch of questions, kind of validate some information you provided. At the end of the process, from a browser, you were able to extract a code signing certificate, which was a file that you could place on your computer. So that's how OV certificates worked back then. Back then, the way EV certificates worked is you would go through that same authentication process, but that you would get at the end of the process, you'd get a physical token, like a USB token, sent to you. And that would need to be in your computer to actually do code signing. Well, starting with 2023, the process has changed for OV certificates. So any OV certificates you have already continue to work until they expire. For example, you could have bought OV certificates for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, and those will continue to work just fine for the next couple of years. So any software that you code sign is code signed if that certificate is valid as of today. And in fact, once you build your installer, that installer is good for many years into the future because it was code signed with a valid certificate at the time the installer was built. But starting in 2023, the way OV certificates work has changed. You still go through the process of purchasing at a higher price than before, and you'll get that you'll go through this authentication process, but at the end of the process, they're going to physically send to you a little USB dongle. And then once you get that dongle, you have to go through a little process on your computer to actually make the certificate work. So prior to 2023, OV certificates were used a file-based certificate. Now they use a token-based certificate that entails them sending a dongle to you. Let's assume you've already built and tested your installer with ClickInstall, and now you're ready to code sign your applications in the installer itself. And for this first example, we're going to be using a file-based OV certificate. That was the older style of OV certificates. A lot of developers probably already have a certificate that's still good for several years here. So with that approach, during when you purchase a certificate, you have extracted a certificate file out of a browser. And here we see an example of a certificate file sitting on our computer. So we've selected that. So in the code sign panel of ClickInstall, we've selected our certificate file. We've entered a password that's been assigned to that certificate file. And we've selected a timestamp URL, and there are several timestamp URLs here. You'll probably just go with the first one. That's the default. Finally, we're going to set the checkbox code sign the installer and apps, and then we can click this button, select apps library, and it'll show all the different exe files and DLL files and such that are in our source folder that was used to build this installer. In this case, we just had just the one file. So we can just set checkboxes, click OK, and then we'll get a list of all the additional files we're going to code sign, which could include exe files and DLL files. So if you think about how the installer is built, first it's going to go through and code sign all the DLLs, then the exe files, then it's going to build the installer, and then finally it's going to code sign the finished installer. So we've selected file-based for this, and to build our code sign installer, we're going to simply click the build button and it will output our finished code signed installer. Now let's talk about the new OV style certificates where they send you a USB token. So to use this type of certificate with ClickInstall, you're going to want to select the radio button token based. And the instruction button presents some detailed instructions that cover most of the topics we're talking about in this video. The starting point is you're going to, you can ignore the certificate field because that was with the file-based certificates, so you can just leave that blank. You'll still have to select a timestamp URL, and you'll still set the checkbox and pick the exe files and DLL files and such that you want to code sign. But in order to make that USB token useful for a ClickInstall or anything, you're first going to have to install a driver on your computer, and you'll get an email from the company that supplies the token for the driver that you need to download and install. Here's an example, and probably the most common example. You'll get an email that includes some links to download the driver, so you'll download the appropriate driver, and then you'll follow a little install process that has you go through the process of installing that driver so you can access this USB token. And as part of that process, you're going to assign a password to it. So let's say you follow through this series of screens. You now have a driver installed and you have your token plugged into your USB port on your computer. So the next step of the process is to go ahead and build our installer. So we'll just click the build button. When you do that, a little dialog will pop up from that driver, in which case you'll have to enter the password, and then it will complete the process of building your code-signed installer. As we mentioned, when you're building your installer, it will code sign the individual exe files, DLL files, and then the finished installer itself. And the way the SafeNet authentication client, that driver we installed on the computer to access that OV certificate token, the way that works is every time you call that, it's going to pop up the dialog to enter the password. So that's going to get quite annoying if you're code signing multiple things or you're building multiple different installers. So the way around that is you can bring up a settings panel for that SafeNet authentication client driver, and there's an option on that. We have a screenshot to show you here. If you go to advanced options, you can set this checkbox, and that way you'll still be required to enter your password once during your login session, but after that it remembers it until you log out of the computer. So you can rebuild as many different installers as you want, and you won't be prompted to enter the password again. Now, it won't allow you to actually paste in the password into the dialog that's presented, so you actually have to type it, but you could just type in the password into this field of ClickInstall, and as long as that tab is selected, you'll see it there on the screen along with the dialog that's presented the very first time. So that it'll make it pretty easy to type in the password once. And this is also would apply if you were using the batch build option in ClickInstall. In ClickInstall, you have the option of clicking a button, and you'll get a list of all the pre-configured installers. You can check them all, or as many as you want to build, and then when you click Build All, it'll go through and build them all in one batch. And so you won't be required to re-enter that password each time.